We have a guest in studio today, the one and only infamous Mr. Jeff Kravitz.
Hello.
He's here to spill the beans on everything you've ever fucking hoped the beans would be spilled. Tell us about yourself a little bit.
You want to know it all. My name is Jeffrey P. Kravitz, originally from Atlantic City, New Jersey, born in 1962. Celebrated my 61st birthday yesterday.
Muzzle.
Thank you very much. I made it. I survived. I'm a huge music fan. Started when I was a wee lad. I remember getting, because music, the crazy thing about music and our access to it, which is amazing now because everything's at your fingertips. But when I grew up, it wasn't like that. Everything had to be acquired. You either acquired it by begging your mother to death to buy you some record that you fell in love with because you loved the album art when she was working. We had two guys, was the name of the store, that was like a department store with a food shop and also had like a music area with records. And she'd go in the food area and I would just go in those record bins, and I had to be 8, 9, 10 years old, just flipping through the records, trying to look at the art and think about what they were. And I'd beg Mom to buy them. And the other source of my music was my neighbors, the Castellanis. Rocky Castellani was a boxer, and he lived across from us. And in the basement is where the kids hung out, and they had the vinyl, and they had everything. They had Cream, they had The Doors, they had Steppenwolf, they had every 60s band, every cool album cover I'd ever seen, Jimi Hendrix, and also had an incredible comedy selection too. George Carlin, The 7 Words You Never Say on TV, Cheech and Chong. And we were, 10, 11, 12 years old, going up and listening to that stuff on the record player. Another way, music wasn't everywhere. It wasn't in your pocket everywhere you went. You had to have a dedicated time and a place to sit down and listen to a record, and someone would say, we're going to listen to this vinyl, and drop that, stylus to access the music. And when I got into the jam band scene through the Grateful Dead initially, and then in the Phish in the early 90s, 94, I had a birthday party in my house, famous for my parties. I was doing them back then. I was 32 years old, and I'd been seeing the Grateful Dead for a couple years. I was late to the Grateful Dead scene, and someone gave me a copy of Hoist, said, I think you're going to like this band. And they were appearing a couple weeks later at the Will Turn. And I was like, I heard the record, and I was like, yeah, I do like this band. I want to go check out Phish. And I went to the Will Turn 94 and saw it was a show where, after watching Jerry fall asleep on his shoulder with the guitar in his hand in the middle of a solo, I was kind of, and I had incredible energy. I was 32, and I was popping at the seams. And you'd go see Phish, and Trey was like a big sheepdog with the hair in his eyes, bobbing his head. These are my songs, and you're going to like them. And he would fucking just lay it down. And I was like, yes, you're right. These are your songs, and I do like them.
I mean, it was like the polar opposite.
Totally opposite. And, everybody talks about Grateful Dead, the Phish, and the real difference is the influence of where those musicians came from. Jerry was not raised on Jimi Hendrix. Jerry was not raised on the Beatles. Well, he was raised on the Beatles. The Beatles were a big influence for Jerry.
Sure.
But Hendrix wasn't an influence for him as a guitar player. Jimmy Page wasn't an influence for him as a guitar player. Frank Zappa wasn't an influence for him as a guitar player. And those are three of my favorite musicians I just named that influenced Trey Anastasio to a oomph degree, and really pulled his influence. And those were my influences when I was a teenager. Those are the people I love. I wasn't listening to Doc Watson or Lefty Frizzell, Bill Frisell, all these guitar players that influenced Jerry, these flat pickers, these amazing banjo players.
Although it was around.
Well, that's what it was. And, and I had met Jerry Garcia. I had the fortunate opportunity to meet Jerry Garcia, not once but twice, and in the same place both times. And it was in Seattle. It was 1994, and I was going to the gym at that time of my life. And I went up to the gym, and I'm sitting there with a bunch of guys, and I'm literally tearing Jerry apart for the show the night before in the locker room. Just like turning his back on the audience, not looking, not communicating, like all the things that wasn't happening at that first night of Seattle in 94. And in those days, there weren't a lot, it was few and far between the sparks, but they still happened. And we turn around and there's Garcia enters the locker room with a members only jacket on, wearing shorts and shoes, and proceeds to go to the treadmill. And course, go over, ask him if he wants anything to drink, go to get him a pineapple juice. Yeah, a little pineapple juice from the little refrigerator over there. Go grab a pineapple juice. And it's for the next 40 minutes, stand there, just peppering him and having a conversation, asking him everything I wanted to ask about the music. And one of there were a couple of revealing things he said. At that time, they were rehearsing St. Stephen, but then they never played it. And I asked him about that. I was like, what's up with the St. Stephen? How come you're not dropping it? And he's like, I was really blunt. I'm from Jersey. I didn't really hold back. I had an opportunity to talk to somebody. I'm not going to be like, oh, you're having a good day. How's the sun? I want to get... Eventually, we got into the conversation.
And I feel like people like that who have, some stature, they want that kind of conversation. They want to be engaged with a lot of the time. Maybe not Jerry, but...
Well, but no, Jerry was totally down and totally into talking about it.
They want to just be, worshipped and, we're not worthy.
Right. He was interested in what I did as a profession. When I told him when I was a celebrity photographer, he's all, that's got to be a crazy profession. I was like, it was a really interesting conversation. He was a very nice guy and really easy to talk to. And so he was talking about St. Stephen. He's like, that's a very theatrical song, and we're not a theatrical band. And I know what he's talking about because that bridge is so difficult.
Yeah.
Lady finger. I'm singing it like Phil. Lady finger. That whole part just stops the song and slows it down. There's no way to do the song without doing that part. It's part of the song that they wrote. So Jerry was like, fuck, just threw that away. And then I also asked him about Dark Star, and his reaction was, that's a beautiful song. That's one of my favorite songs, I was like, why don't you play more? And I get, he was old. He was at 53 when he died, but he looked like he was 83. So it wasn't exactly in the best health. It's interesting now when we look back at people that are in their 60s and 70s, me included. I look at myself in the mirror and I look at pictures of Wilford Brimley when he was a cocoon and he was 52 and he looked like he was 90.
No, it's crazy.
It's nuts. We're aging at a different rate now. Things are different, and that's why Phish is so vibrant. So one of the other things Jerry told me was about taping, and Jerry was a taper himself, which is one of the reasons he allowed taping. And in those days, there was Wall and Sack was a tape deck, was a reel-to-reel. And he's like, I had a Wall and Sack deck, which Pinky, my dad, was a radio talk show host, and he had a couple of these Wall and Sacks when I was a kid. We used to use them to make little shows, make recordings on. And he used to take his Wall and Sacks to the bluegrass shows. And in those days, there weren't really PAs. He would just they had a power strip in the front and for people to plug their tape decks in. And he would sit there holding a microphone to record what the bluegrass guys were doing. So he could take it later and lay it down and listen to it and play what they were playing and learn what they were doing. So for him, it was a tool to learn how to do music. But Jerry Garcia was a taper. I don't know if a lot of people know that.
I didn't know.
And that's one of the reasons he opened up taping, which was a huge part of accessing Grateful Dead music as I got into it, and a huge way for us, because a lot of things that happened with the Grateful Dead also moved over to Phish, and some of those were taping.
Phish, it was like a huge marketing ploy, allowed them to spread far and wide, right? Because they were getting used as filler a lot of the time on
Dead Tape.
A lot of
times in the early days, it was filler. You're right.
You had a little Phish on the back end.
Yeah, like a Divided Sky or a Yem, throw it on the last 20 minutes of a second set.
Yeah, there was a lot of dead space on those tapes because the Dead was only doing 45 minutes, and if you didn't, it was really taping. The whole culture was so interesting when I came into it because I went to these shows, these Dead shows, and I became a taper. I ended up buying a DAT machine and going to Odie Brothers, which is OADE, Odie Brothers. They made connectors, special connectors, so you could daisy chain digitally from DAT to DAT. And you guys would just go to a show and you'd have these daisy chains with little Y connectors, and I would just go because when the show was over, I needed to get that music into my DNA. It was in order for it to become, I wanted it, when I heard an amazing show, I wanted it to become part of me. And for it to become part of me, I had to listen to it over and over and over again, where I started to understand everything that was going on stage. And in those days, in the 90s, the mid-90s, there was a lot going on stage. The band was really in a different space than where they are now and where they were even from 94 to 97 and 98. It was a whole metamorphosis that happened. But those first Phish shows I saw, it was so much happening, really hard to dance to, very artsy, weird, angular. They weren't trying to create this groovy, funky dance space where we go now when we go to shows,
Yeah, it was more just like jaw-dropping, like, what the fuck are these guys?
Speed, efficiency, talent, synchronicity. Those were all the things in the early days.
And that all those songs that they wrote in the late 80s, early 90s are all speed. Just like how fast can we go and how many minds can we blow by doing things that people have never seen before, which is so Zappa-esque.
I totally agree. Zappa, his level of musicianship is definitely something I felt when I saw Phish. Phish to me was like Zappa meets Grateful Dead meets Genesis. It had so many different influences that I loved wrapped into one thing.
Yeah.
The weird lyrics that made absolutely no sense, that people were analyzing to this day. It's so many things that happened between those two bands and the synchronicity and just try and access that music and make it a part of you. And I have to say, now, if the show's not up in an hour, everybody's cranky as fuck, aren't they? When that tweezer took fucking, 2 days to get up from...
Yeah, it's for 2 days.
Everybody was on their minds. We listen at praising the fucking tapers, which is something, I don't get the tapers because I'm just like, how come we have these microphones blocking our view in the middle of a prime spot? And the technology is so much different, but everybody was God bless the tapers after that.
Absolutely. I mean, a taper's ticket, as you just mentioned, is pretty fucking sweet spot. So, like, even if you're just bringing a pole with a mic on the end of it and pretending to tape, it might be a pretty good move.
Yeah, I mean, you get a good spot, but if you're not a real taper, those guys will boo you out. Plus, you can't really party around there and talk. Not that I want to talk, but sometimes you want to say a word or say something or cough from a joint, and then everybody's, ooh, shut up. So, I mean, I love the tapers. To me, I was one, so I get it. But now I just don't see it because now not only are we getting soundboard quality, matrix mixed tapes, we're also have video.
Yeah.
A full video of the show, where before I remember Kevin Shapiro would almost tackle people because he saw them with the video camera in there. They wanted no video in there. If anybody was the video on a camera on the floor and anybody saw someone, this is back in the 1.0 days, they would boot them out, man. That was the cardinal sin.
But they video recorded.
We have Phish had them. Phish had their chiropractor, Eric Larson, and he would go out. He would adjust the band, do the massages before they started. And this is when I started working with the band in the late to mid 90s, 97, 98. And then Eric would go out and be the soundboard. He'd be a single camera VHS, and he would have a wide shot. And then he would kind of zoom in the two, maybe zoom in the Trey, and then go back wide. So it's not like you have a multi-camera shoot like you have now, 12 cameras all over the place, and the way it's going now, it's a completely different. They were like, okay, you're a chiropractor, and while we're on stage not doing anything, you're going to be the video guy too. So
yeah, it was just like push record, and
it wasn't hard.
That's how you zoom.
Right, it wasn't hard. So that when you say they have videotapes, yes, they have videotapes. Are they the kind of things they can release as archival releases where you're going to get high dollar and be able to remaster and make look good enough? Nah. It's more of a novelty thing that, here's what it looked like.
Did they use one of those videos for one of the Dinner and a Movie?
I think the one that they used was the one that the guy shot in Europe. Remember, the guy had a single camera, and he went in there, and they had the video, but they didn't have the audio. And then someone finally came with the audio, and they synced
it up.
Sunk the two up.
Yeah.
They synced them up, and that's what we saw for that Dinner and a Movie. But that was a single camera thing, too. But that guy was trying to be artsy, and it was a real small venue, and he was in the mix, moving around. So it was a little bit more dynamic than, just on the tripod. But, the band has a lot of archives. There's a lot of everything, and it's amazing to me. I think the Grateful Dead were amazed that they could release anything they released and put Steal Your Face on it. The fans wanted to buy, even if it was a show that they've had for 30 years.
Yeah.
That wasn't much difference in the sound quality.
I mean, Phish has to have, like, an incredible archive of shit that they are just holding on to. And what, are you going to release after they're dead?
No. Well, don't you think most of the stuff's out there? Like, how much do you think isn't out there?
I don't know. There's no, like, official recording of Big Cypress.
That's one thing that we've talked about. Like, what is going on with Big Cypress, right? They've done the Gorge. They've done the Clifford Ball. Like, that is the most epic, arguably one of the most epic nights of
that Vegas video they released where Trey was out of his mind.
I don't think I saw that.
Yeah, it's some of that stuff. The band wasn't in their best frame of mind in those days.
Yes.
And the partying had definitely gone from after the show to before and touring. In that case, during the show. From what I heard, was in the porta potty that night. I heard it was loaded. So I think, that's the way you get through a 9-hour show, right? I mean, in those days, the band was still raging, and that was a different Phish. And I don't think when you probably look at those videos and you see what they look like after fucking, you know how your face gets when you're fucking doing, you ever see anybody high on Molly? Like they're chewing on the side of their face. I mean, so I'm saying it just doesn't look, the video's not as good as I'm not saying that was the substance or anything. I'm not putting anything on anybody, but that's what it was. But,
So you think they're maybe embarrassed?
No, I just don't think that it makes the quality looks good enough where it's the kind of thing that they want to see 9 hours of this, on video and release it. You can hear it on audio. The audio's out.
Not official.
Not officially. But which is interesting.
There's tapes out there.
Yeah.
It's on re-listen.
Right.
That's the only way to listen to.
So everything's out, right? What's a surprise? I mean, what was your takeaway from that show? Was there one jam that you listened to over and over again from that? Because I really don't go back to that show and listen to it much. I mean, that to me is the indicator, something where I'm like, this was amazing and I really need to have this.
It's like the rock and roll from that. And Down with Disease.
Yeah, I mean, the Down with Disease, like 10 to 14 minutes into that Down with Disease, which is kind of right after the fireworks are going off at the beginning. And it's kind of when they first start, they just like, okay, they come out, it's a meat stick, the fireworks are going off, Old Lang Syne, we're all like just getting started, right?
Right.
No, people are at peak energy, we're just like buckling up. And then they drop into this DWD, the fireworks cease, and they just like lock into this craziness, like 10 to 14 minutes in, which just ended up in my mind, and it's maybe just the way the brain works, but it's like, it was like the sound of the whole rest of the show. Like Fishman's Pocket for the rest of the night, I feel like started in that DWD. They do some great stuff. And one of my favorites is the Sand from that night. I mean, I just remember when that Sand went down, it's the middle of the night.
So three songs out of 30 that you want to hear again. So, I mean, come on, that's 10%. So, I mean, if it was something that was cohesive that went on for like 2 or 3 hours and they're like, this is going to be out. But, look, the way we consume information nowadays is completely different than we did back then. Everything is short form. Like everything I watch, I'm laughing. Like I watch these reels and TikToks and I'm laughing in 1 second. And then I flip the next video and I'm crying. And the next video, I'm getting informed and learning something. It's just like such an emotional roller coaster. And it all happens in like 90 seconds. I've been happy. I've been sad. I've been informed. And I look and a minute and a half's gone by and I'm like, this is a different world now. Things happen differently. Yeah, you didn't know it was a taper, huh? Kravitz bringing his dad in. Whoa. Going down and fucking plugging in.
Bring a mic. You just brought your.
You don't need a mic.
You just brought your deck.
That would be
your chain into the mic.
Yeah,
that was somebody else's.
There would be 30 decks like that.
Yeah,
and you had to make sure you had batteries. You only got your batteries. Ask someone to change your batteries during the fucking break, because if they didn't change it and one went out, then it fucking knocks everybody else out behind you in the chain. Ooh. And then the next time you show up, they're like,
"Fuck you!" No,
yeah, salty. And then, I would go down there in the beginning. I would go down there after the show and just be like, I need a fucking tape of that. I remember specifically Damien Crunkshack. You know Damien, right? Going down after fucking Sacramento. They'd going to see them in Sacramento, and the show was fucking boppers, and going down there being like, I'm looking for a copy. I'm looking for a copy of this show. I'm looking for a copy of... No, I'm good. I'm looking for a copy of the show, and he ended up sending it to me. And I just met him online, and then years later met him, and now he's somebody I see all the time as part of our outside our crew. Yeah. So it's like, I met people back then trying to become a taper, and then all of a sudden you're like, I need this now. I want to take this and go home afterwards, because there were guys. There was this dude, Barry. He was a dead taper, and he had a fucking van, and also had really good weed. And he would tape the shows, and then after the show in his van, he would play them back, and he'd be blaring them out of the back of his thing. And I always thought that was amazing to have the show right afterwards. And I'm like, okay, how much is a DAT? How much could it be? So then there was Terrapin Tapes is where you bought your tapes. That's where you bought your DAT tapes, and that's where you bought your XLs. If you wanted, because when you tape traded, people weren't going to take your DATs. They wanted to have a cassette, because that's what everybody listened to it on.
Yeah.
So I have the DAT. And then I had the DAT, take it in the car. But I took the DAT player in the car after a while. And I remember taking the DAT player on the road when I would go somewhere and just like take a bunch of DATs with me and plug the headphones in and listen to when I flew and stuff like that. Because it'd just be like, well, I got that player. And
Why put it on tape?
yeah, why I have to worry about it?
You're trading it.
It was great. It was fucking great. And the quality was great. And, also all the old shows you would get would be on DATs too. All those old Dead shows would come out, show up on DAT. So, all right.
See, I spent like a year before I ever saw Phish only accessing them through tapes, either people I knew, and then I got on rec.music.phish,
Where'd you grow up?
the news group. Boston.
Boston.
Yeah.
Well, you had a lot of access. What year was this?
But it's the mid 90s. Like, I didn't see them until 97, right? So like, I can't tell you for sure when I started falling in love with them, but it wasn't earlier than 95, 96, right?
Was that a Boston area show that you went to, the first one?
The first show I ever went to was in New York.
Was it New York City?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then obviously they did Worcester, and it's just the way it felt. Like, I mean, I was younger. Like, the thought of asking, just never like go to a concert by myself, go to a Phish con. It was just like,
Well, no, we didn't go by ourselves, but it was funny because I grew up in Atlantic City, and our closest venue was a Spectrum in Philadelphia.
right.
And in order to get there, you needed a ride. And my mom was not driving us. And I remember the first concert that I begged my mom to get tickets for was Aerosmith. That all my friends, Aerosmith was hot. This is like 1976, 77, 78, around then. And Aerosmith was so hot, that's when they were all smacked out. Those were prime days. And had to beg Mom to let us take the bus to Philadelphia, the New Jersey Transit. And that's a public bus. And then you get off the bus station, you get on the subway, and you take the subway down to the Spectrum. And you have to make sure you leave that concert in time to get that last bus back to Atlantic City at night. So there was a lot of responsibility. It came with a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
I think I ended up taking my brother. We go to the show. First song, someone throws a bottle on stage, piece of glass in Steven Tyler's eye. Cancel the fucking show after one song. We'd seen Golden Earring before, and then they came out, they did one song, and we were on the bus, and we were so pissed. And the next year, the same exact thing happened with Firework. First song come out, someone threw an M80. Concerts in those days were nuts. The whole venue was GA. And there was no seats on the floor. So they would open the doors, and everybody would just run in. And a natural instinct as a kid is to go to the floor and get as close as you can to the stage. But that was the biggest mistake you could make. Because if you got something down low or in the bowl, you had a designated space. If someone was sitting on top of you, you could just sit down and they were out of your space. So that, to me, was to have your own area. Because when you look down on that floor, I might see Jack in the middle of that floor, and 2 seconds later, Jack was at the back of the floor, and then he was at the front of the floor, because you were just like, the whole crowd was in flux and moving, because there was nowhere to go. You see now at the front of, I'm not going to get into the front of the Phish, the stage area, the rail or anything like that, but you see the amount of space there, and I think back to those days where the crowd, where you were just, it was not a mosh pit, there was no room to mosh, there was no room. Some people, if you weren't tall enough, your feet weren't even on the floor. You were just going through the crowd, It was nuts. And then there were fireworks. I saw people light bottle rockets in a venue, and like all of a sudden you see it go, and you're like, where the fuck is that going to go? Where's that going to land? There were firecrackers, M80s, bottles. People would sneak bottles in, so you see bottles flying through the crowd. It was really a different era of concert going in those 70s. And it wasn't until the Who show in Cincinnati, Ohio, in like 1980, I believe, where the 6 people got trampled and died. And I was in Philadelphia, and almost the same thing happened. I remember holding back, because I'm a big guy, holding back a crowd of people where there were people falling in front of me, holding back people so those people could get up, because Cincinnati had just happened, and I didn't want to see that happen again in Philadelphia. So it was they after that, they made the seated. There was a seated floor, or there was a limited amount of people they would let on, and this floor would only be GA, and the rest of the venue would be seated. Can you imagine the whole venue GA for Phish, where everybody's like first come, first serve?
Well, that's what happened with Greek.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's a shit show of epic proportion.
Yeah. It was a shit show of epic proportion.
Because you guys linked up there, right? And you had to figure it out.
The Greek, you definitely need some friends that know how to tarp. Because unless they're saving you some space, and the tarping is disgusting, and the whole thing looked really bad, but at the same time, it's such a fun. It's great when you're on the tarp, not so great when you're looking for the back row down on it. But God, man, we learned taping from the Grateful Dead, because the first time I saw that was at a Dead show, and I was shocked. Tarping. And the first time I was at Cal Expo, I went to go see the Dead. I was a reluctant Deadhead. I went to go see them. They played the Coliseum, and I finally told Sean Alkus, my roommate, I was like, he'd be going to see the Dead and taking everybody, and they would always come back into our house, be like, oh my God, it's incredible. Like, you fucking hippies. And this is in like 88, 89. I'm like, you fucking hippies. And then finally the Dead were here. Brent had died. Hornsby was in the band. And I was like, Jerry probably doesn't have many years left. I should probably go see them before Jerry dies. And this is like early 90s, 91, 92. They played the Coliseum in L.A. And I was like, all right, I'll go down to Coliseum and saw them. And I went down to Coliseum, and I saw enough of an inkling where I wanted to see more, where I was just like, okay, that was interesting and different, and I'd like to see more. I saw the Hells Angels clearing the aisles because everybody ran down broke through security from the seats. I was one of them, and just ran down into the aisles, and everybody was in the aisles. I found an empty seat and hung in it. As long as you were in a seat, you were fine. Those Hells Angels were not nice. Cleared all the aisles out. I was like, Hells Angels and the Grateful Dead together. I was like, this is stuff I read about electrocuted acid test. Yeah. I mean, I read that book when I was a teenager and loved the culture, loved LSD, loved everything about it, but just never got into the Dead. I always thought they were old and hippies, and that's in the late 70s and early 80s when I was in high school and in college, where I was like, nah. Even in college, my roommates, my girlfriends were all into the Grateful Dead, and they would go to shows and come back and be like, guys, like, shut up, you hippies. I was going to see punk bands. I was going to see whatever was hot, Billy Idol, Flock of Seagulls, Romeo Void, the Dead Kennedys, Flipper, all these punk bands that would come in. I was into whatever was new and fresh. I still like Genesis. I would go see Genesis every time they rolled into town. Pink Floyd, Yes, I'm a huge Yes fan. I was a huge prog rocker. But, the Dead and I didn't connect. And I guess it was better because it allowed me to get my life in order, understand my career, get everything together. I didn't have that pull of the Grateful Dead up until I was like 30 years old. And at that point, I was well immersed as a photographer in the LA culture, doing the MTV thing and the pop thing. And for me, the hippie bands and jam bands were a way for me to escape from the reality of this boring ass contrived music business that I was involved with. It was a way for me to connect with music that wasn't commercial, and it wasn't in excess. So I love all those bands. I love all that music, but everything, the videos, all the packaging. The thing about the Dead was they looked the same walking down the street as they did on stage. And the same thing with Phish. Well, maybe not Mike, but their fashion has definitely changed over the years. Yeah. Won't get into the fashion analysis of Phish, but back in the day, they were in the same clothes for a week or whatever it was when they were on the road. You'd see the same.
Pepe Le Pew.
Right, Pepe Le Pew. Yeah.
When did you know you were hooked on Phish? Like you said you saw him at the Winter instantly, or
that Wiltern show? You know what it was? There was this affliction you had after you saw a great jam show. One was buy a T-shirt, and while you're in the T-shirt line, they'd have a little postcard there with where the band was going to be next. And I remember picking up that postcard, and this is at the Wiltern, and I want to say March. This show was something like that, maybe something like that, March '94. I remember picking up that thing and looking at where Phish was going to play in the next month, and seeing 3 shows at the Warfield, and saying, you know what? This band that I saw tonight will never play the Warfield again. I was like, that's going to be some historical shit. I'm going to the fucking Warfield. So I went to those shows, and that was the first time I was like, all right, I need more. And it happened to me with the Grateful Dead, that show when I went when I was there and I saw them at the Coliseum. The same thing. I was like, where are they next? Oh, they're at Cal Expo. I was like, that's got to be some hometown mojo. And I walked into those shows at the Cal Expo. I did a half hit of X, a half a hit of acid in the lot. Some big, fat, smelly hippie chick grabbed me and gave me a hug, and I just fell into it. And there's Bill Graham handing out apples as I walked in, and I'm like, holy fucking shit, this exists. This scene, it's like slipping into the 60s. It's all here. It was all there, the drugs, the scene, the music, and it was amazing. And when I finally let the Grateful Dead control my mind, it was surrendered to the flow. it was a revelation for me musically that music isn't this formulated thing where it's the same songs and the same set list every night. You know, as a prog rock fan, I went to see Genesis, and if Genesis fucking dropped a note or went into a 15-minute jam in the middle of a song, you look at each other like they were crazy. Like, what the fuck is this? This isn't on the record. When I started, I went to go see bands live. Kansas, yes, Genesis. I wanted to hear it exactly like it was on the record, note for fucking note. And if you fucked it up, I'd be like, you know, not happy about it. The same thing with Phish now, but I wasn't making room for the improv. Even though I was a huge jazz fan and loved jazz from the time I was a young teenager, you know, growing up in Atlantic City, I remember being like 14, 15 years old and sneaking into the Jockey Club. It wasn't really sneaking. They knew how old we were, but the drinking age was 18. And we would go to this place called the Jockey Club to see these old sax players, a guy named Phil Woods. And I remember taking 4 or 5 of my friends, like, let's go see Phil Woods play jazz. And we didn't understand jazz or know what it was, but I know I wanted to see this guy and I wanted to hear him. And I went in and saw it. And the Jockey Club was a cool little fucking hang. I mean, this is really, you know, this is going back. We're talking 1976, 77. And, you know, I love jazz. I love Return to Forever. I love fusion. I love proficiency. I was a musician. You know, I was playing trumpet in the band, in third trumpet. I wasn't a great trumpet player, but I was still in the school orchestra, and I had always been taking music lessons. It was always something that was offered. And then I did the rock band in middle school. Started with bass, and then in high school eventually moved to guitar, and I still play guitar and love guitar. So I, you know, have been fortunate in my career to take guitar lessons, sit at the feet of some of the greatest guitar players in the history of music, and sit there and watch them, from John Lee Hooker to B.B. King to every historical. I worked for the House of Blues, working for MTV now for 3 decades. I mean, I've seen it, I've shot it all, and I absorbed it all like a big old sponge. It's all part of me.